I'm going to tell you a lot of nonsense about Rust today. Just for the virtual people, I am going to do a Q&A session at the end, so you guys can just hang in there. If there are any questions, just send it to the Track 4 channel. I should get it then. Let's get right into it. Rust, WebAssembly, and 2 smoking barrels. It's got nothing to do with the movie. It's got a lot to do with the English expression that says lock, stock, and barrel, which means kind of everything. And I want to tell you a little bit of how Rust can be everything if you want it to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it can be, all right? So at random times, something like that might happen. Be warned, all right? So let's take a look. The first thing that you need to take away from the talk, and the only thing that is important, is animal rescue. So dead animals walking is one that I particularly like. So when you go out here, please go donate everything you have, your savings, sell your car, sell your house, all of that. It will make a puppy happy. And I might like you. Depends. Okay. Let's take a look at how I landed in Rust. I used to be a contractor until I screwed up. But this is me. This is me writing an app for a client in Kotlin in WebAssembly.
I didn't know he was going to go.
Yeah.
I thought he shook his hands earlier. No. Good stand in the back.
Lean out the side.
Very slowly. No more left. Yeah.
I need to come this way.
I think he's trying to go over the bump.
Oh, but he's going to drive into the wall now.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, go back up.
So now you can come straight.
Bietjie links, bietjie links.
Now you can come straight.
All right. True story. I sent that to my insurance broker as a Christmas present. She hasn't spoken to me yet. So, anyway, there I was, building an app in WebAssembly in Kotlin. JetBrains came along and said, this thing is in beta, we're going to cancel it, and we're going to move on to something else, and screw you and your client and the 6 months that you put into this. And I was in a conundrum where I had already taken their money. And as a contractor, you never give back money, you just ask for more. So I had to find something else. I was scrambling around. People were going like, no, you have to write in C++. I was going like, nah. And then I discovered Rust. And I saw, wait a minute, you can do stuff in Rust. And I saw a demo of someone that had ported some Photoshop functionality to WebAssembly running in Safari. I mean, not even a real browser. So there we were, and I was like, okay, Rust is it. We are going to go with Rust. Now, I'm going to have a little bit of a chat here with you about Rust and why I think you should look at Rust. There's a few myths about Rust. The first myth is that it's difficult. It's not. It is near fucking impossible to learn. So it's way more than difficult. But it is worth it. People see it on your CV and they go like instantly, how much money would you like to work here? Serious. It's an enormous thing to put on your CV. So there's a DevConf rate thing where you can go and rate a talk. The rating is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You give me zeros for everything. You still win a chance, or stand a chance to win one of those fancy little electric robot vacuum thingies. So never mind the talk. Go on there now. Go rate and get yourself one of those things. Who knows? It might happen. Okay. So Rust. So this looks amazing, by the way. I did all this UX myself. So I give UX classes if you need any UX classes, anytime. So why would you do Rust? So for me, the big thing is that I have very specific problems I need to solve for clients, and they could be back-end problems, they could be front-end problems, they could be marriage problems, it doesn't matter. I need something that can work for everything, right? And Rust seems to play in that space. I'm not a web developer, but I often have to build admin consoles or something like that for dumbass clients. Beloved clients. So what I need is I need a language that will allow me to do that and write performant code, correct code, unhackable code, because if your server is not connected to the internet, nobody can hack it. So all that kind of stuff with one language. I found that Rust allows me to do that, and it keeps me as far away from JavaScript as possible, which is a life goal, by the way. So, crap. Now, of course, it's a live demo, and then things will just not work. What we can do is we can bring... Sorry, I'm trying to drag something onto the screen. Just go. Oh, wait. I don't know if Safari... There we go. This is ridiculous. There we go. There we go. Yeah, you can clap. It's fine, you can clap. It's perfect. Can we see this? Oh, yes, we can. All right. So, now, what are we seeing? We're seeing something uses something. Nah. We've got some kind of a struct. So that is something that keeps track of something for us. It's kind of an object that's just floating around. If you've done any kind of programming, a lot of this just makes sense out of the box, right? So even though Rust has this reputation of being challenging, there's a lot of things that actually make sense if you're willing to just open your mind a little bit and say, okay, it doesn't look exactly like the language that I use normally, but I can understand some of the concepts. Some of this is starting to make sense to me. All right. Oh, enums. Everybody knows enums, right? So at least there's something familiar here. We're already on our way to being Rust programmers. And we can see, okay, so now it becomes a little bit trickier. Implement what for what? So Rust has this concept of traits, which is kind of like characteristics, and you can add this to objects or structs. If you've done any kind of Swift language development, then this should be familiar. If you haven't, don't worry. It's almost like object-oriented, just better. So you can add stuff on the fly. And we're going to do some of this through the talk. We're going to see how this works. So our problem at the moment is that when we are here, this thing is not working, okay? So what I want to do is I want to go see, okay, so here we can see here's some code that seems to have something to do with that. And even if you are not a Rust programmer, you can recognize that this is where things are supposed to happen. I'm going to tell you something interesting. Update has two states. Update, it's called whenever the UI gets updated for whatever reason, and it can either refresh or it cannot refresh. So if I go and say, all right, I actually think that you should refresh. You can see that our page reloaded, and now this is the most amazing thing in the world, right? Nice. Come on. There we go. Thank you for coming to my talk. Have a lovely day. No, not quite. Let's go take a look at this again. All right. So we've now seen that it's pretty simple to start building this component. But look at this. This, if you look at this looks very familiar. If anybody has done this web stuff, you would have seen some of this div thingies floating around and this PP thingies floating around and all of this stuff. You've seen this floating around, right? So with a little bit of syntactical sugar, we've got little brackets around it, so this is text that we want to show. All of the stuff you can pick up, but it reads as something quite familiar. It's not scary. This is the thing, right? This is not difficult stuff. This is not scary at all. So you can run for it, hey? Don't worry. So what I love about this is it allows me to use a language that is perceived as really difficult to do really dumb things and look brilliant. And this is exactly what I want from a programming language. So if we look here, this is all normal HTML as we would do it. We're going to talk a little bit about this HTML with the exclamation mark thing just now, because that's one of the most powerful features of Rust that I think is undervalued, especially by newcomers. It's called macros, and it's the thing that I just browsed past in the beginning because I dealt with macros in C++ and I'm still bleeding from that. But in Rust, it's actually usable and it's actually very nice. Now, how do we use this thing? Well, here we've got something that renders so what, so that must have something to do with how that page is built and displayed, blah, blah, blah. We'll see how that works just now. But look here, there's more of that HTML stuffies. And this is things that look familiar, and what do we have here? We have our component. If you've done any kind of React or Vue of any of that kind of nonsense, you know, the inferior, old, we don't use them anymore frameworks, then this would look very familiar. You would go like, oh, okay, so that's how I use a component. So Rust takes care of all the life cycle management and all of that for me through the U framework. So we have frameworks in Rust now, which we didn't have 2 years or so ago, that were very usable. The tooling has caught up, the frameworks has caught up, the books have caught up. It's really an amazing time to step into the Rust zone and learn a bit more about Rust. Now, let's move on. Macros. So macros enable something like, before Facebook totally pulled a wanker move on this word, meta was actually a good word out there, so we could use it and not hang our heads in shame, and now we have to. I don't actually want to say it, so it's programming for mortals, because we can now tell the compiler, hey, I would like you to do the hard work because I'm a lazy fuck. That's why I became a developer in the first place. I don't want to write all this code myself. Why would I, if I can make the computer work? What do I mean by that? Well, remember I told you we had these little thingies with the exclamation marks on them? So it's called macros. And let me just zoom in on this a little bit, because I mean my code's awesome. You have to see this in real life. Okay, so menu link active. That's a macro. It takes 2 parameters and it outputs some code. So it actually writes some code for me. But remember, Rust is compiled, not interpreted. So you take a hit at compile time to write code that then gets compiled, that then runs via a macro. How does that work? So it says menu link active. So now I've got to go find out where does that get built. It's probably get built in here somewhere, and here we go. All right, why would I want to do that? This is how the menu gets built. Is that big enough? All right, so again, there's some of that HTML stuffies that we've seen floating around, right? Apparently you have to have these divvy things, and otherwise it doesn't work in the browser. I don't know why. So we can give it all the classy things. The designers really love this, because apparently you can make it look like all goody and stuff. But I mean, honestly, I just want to say that this is the perfect UI, because it works. When you click a button, you can see what a button does. You don't need more than that. You don't need all that stylish stuff and whatever. But here's the thing. I can, when I build my menu, and with the menu I mean the stuff down here, all right? I can go and write all this HTML all the time. What shocked me when I started doing this web development stuff is how much repetitive crap there is. Just to get something out there, you have to do all of this, just to put a little word on the screen that looks the way that you want to do. It is insane amounts of code that you have to write. I understand why web developers are so crazy now, because they have to do all this crap over and over and over. All right, so I looked at this and went like, whoa, this is a lot of work. This led me to trying to find out, is there a way that I can maybe get Rust to do this in a better way, maybe do a smarter way, you know, for me, because I am lazy and I don't want to type all the stuff all the time. I was also in a government school, so I don't type so well, so it takes a long time, and it's just a mess, right? So I went through this, and as you can see, I did it twice, and I was like, no, come on, man, this is ridiculous. Then I discovered macros. And look here, menu link active. Menu link active. So I'm calling the menu link active macro with some parameters. That then at compile time takes that, expands that template that I gave it and puts the code in there and then compiles it. So it's not a runtime thing, it's a compile time thing. So if you use a lot of macros, your compile time does slow down a little bit. It goes from like 6 milliseconds to 8 milliseconds or something like that. And let's just do some more. So all right. So yeah. Anyway, hey, wake up. So the thing is, what I love about that is it's not interpreted, it's compiled. So this is compiled code at the end of the day, but I can make it do all kinds of things for me. So it can write a lot of code on my behalf. So here I'm using it to do two different. So there's also a menu link, there's also an inactive, which is the opposite. And it's just the classes that are a little bit different. That's kind of silly, isn't it? So what if we did something even better? We have menu link. And we go look in menu link, macros calling macros. Now that is next level programming, right? But there's more. I also have the ability to do logical processing inside a macro. I can say there's two different states that this can be in. Depending on the state, I want you to write code that will output the correct thing at the correct time at runtime. Compiled code. So all this branching, all that kind of stuff, it gets handled for me. It just gets put there. I end up looking like I know what I'm doing, but I don't. But it doesn't matter. Rust takes care of all of that for me. So now what happens is if I go and I now go over one of these and I go and click on it, you see that it now is active and it turns inactive, which is pretty cool stuff. So from my perspective, as a non-web developer, being able to do this quickly and easily, it means that I can get that right once, the HTML. I can get it right once. I can put it in a macro, and I can start sending it parameters. And I'm just sending it parameters, and it will now go and put all that HTML code in place for me at compile time, over and done with. All right? Is there more? Do we want to see more? How do we figure out what page we're on? Let's go and look. First of all, enums once again. I wonder if I can maybe make this a little bit bigger. All right, enums once again. So we want to work with something that is quantifiable and that's identifiable, and that would be a message, right? We're all familiar with object-oriented programming and event buses and all that kind of stuff. So I want to respond to messages because that's the easiest way to interpret what the user wants. So we say we're going to care about all these messages. We're going to keep them somewhere. We just need a structure that will keep track of what is the current active state of our application. And yes, there's 1,000 better ways to do this, but for entry to Rust purposes, this is a very approachable and easy to understand example. Now, look at this. Implement for the root component. In other words, take the structure that I have here and add these properties to it, add this functionality to it. So there's our main menu, rendering our main menu, which is the side menu that we had there, right? So all of that code gets added to it. But then there's also a switch to selected content function. And now this switch to selected content, look at this. Let me just zoom in here. So we get a create lifecycle hook, an update lifecycle hook, and a view lifecycle hook. So U does all of this hard lifting for us. So we have this app that starts up, same as in React or Vue, any of those things. You've got these different lifecycle events that can happen. During create, we can decide what's our starting point. It's home, which kind of makes sense. And then we say, when we update, a message is going to come through. So any interaction that the user has with the application will send a message, and the update methods will get notified, and you can decide what do you want to do when that message comes in. You can also just ignore it, because if it's not for you, it's not for you, you just don't care. In this case, we do want all the messages coming to this component, we want to just say, okay, the user clicked on one of the options, because those are the only things that will emit any messages, and that message is going to tell us what content do they want to switch to. This little true tells the component when your update method gets called. Right after that, I want you to re-render yourself. So I care about the fact that your update got called, and I want you to re-render because there's going to be some kind of a visual effect. If this was just something that happens in the background that you don't want, you can just put a false there, and it will not redraw the component. So you don't want everything to redraw all the time because it might not be worth redrawing it. But in this case, we want to, because we want to switch to the new screen. And what happens in the view? This is the draw method. This is what says, all right, I have been asked to present myself. Let me do that. And look at that. There's a little macro once again. So there's a lot of macro programming happening inside Rust. So this under the hood strips all the HTML apart and builds the actual HTML code that enables you to show everything. We just use two methods. We use the render main menu method, which we just added to the root component, and the switch to selected content, and we just pass it a parameter to say, this is the new active content, and I want you to draw that. And what we saw in the pages is it's going to do a match and say which message came in. Depending on the message, it's going to render that, or it's going to render an error to say, I don't know what you're talking about, screw you. So kind of like that, all right? And that is how we do the whole thing. Interestingly enough, because you're using a framework now instead of writing raw Rust, you get async out of the hood, so out of the start. So it's immediately there. You don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. The framework takes care of it. Synchronous and asynchronous programming in Rust can be quite a challenge, but if you leverage stuff like the U framework, you end up in a scenario where, oh, awesome. I actually don't have to care about that anymore. It's become so much more accessible, all right? So now, if we go back, we say, okay, we know enough, but how do we go a little bit further? So there's 3 books I quickly want to touch on. The first one is the one you don't tell your boss about. It's called Hands on Rust, and it is a game development handbook. So you write little games. Console games, little Flappy Bird game, and a little Dwarf Fortress clone where you walk around the dungeon. It's like a dungeon crawler. What's fascinating about the book is it's not particularly long. It's like 100 and something pages. But you work through the book, and by the end of the book, you have a lot of Rust concepts all of a sudden, and you had a lot of fun. And one of the bonus chapters on the website is, how do you take the Flappy Bird game that you wrote that runs on your desktop, how do you turn that into a WebAssembly game? And it is stupid easy. Trust me. It's like half an hour later, you've got a web game. You can be famous, Flappy Bird 2. That's all you need to do, right? All right, so the next one is Rust in Action. That is more for people that are interested in systems level programming. So Tim takes you through what it takes to write systems, utilities, applications, all that, because that requires a little bit of a different nuance than if you were writing like WebAssembly stuff. So are you guys nodding off? So that takes you through a little bit of a different perspective, because remember Rust, even though it started as a systems level programming language, it has evolved into so much more because of the frameworks and how it empowers you to do different things. And the last one is Zero to Production. This is a little bit more of an advanced book. It does start from nowhere, and it takes you up into building a mailing list server management system that runs in production. You can go use this to do your own MailChimp or whatever. So it's really thorough and awesome, but it is quite a lot. If you are just dabbling in Rust, you just want to try it out, I really recommend Hands on Rust because it's so accessible and it's so much fun. And the other two are, if you're going to do serious Rust programming, I would invest in those books. It's taught me an infinite amount. All right, so now about resources. I think I was messing around with it. And let's just see. I'm typing on another screen, so. All right. So by the way, I just rebuilt and redeployed a web app, just, for shits and giggles. All right. So that is insane. So it's not interpreted. It is compiled. There is now a dist folder. I don't know if you can see it. There's a dist folder you can drag onto your server. It's done. Right? This is it. So it's insane how fast this is. So there's some general Rust links, and there's some things about you. Remember to go right to talk. You can win stuff. And I think there's enough time now for questions. Can I take one of the virtual questions quickly? All right, so Joshua asks, how would routing work? If you want, yeah, you can. There are some router plugins that work exactly like in React or Vue. It's just better because it's in Rust. So you can just have a router that will allow you to jump to specific pages and stuff. So all of that kind of stuff is already. I highly recommend that if you have any interest in web work with Rust, that you go check out Vue. There's stuff about WebGL. There's stuff about how do you talk to databases, networking, and all that kind of stuff. You've got access to everything in the browser and WebAssembly and an amazing language, and you 99% of the time don't have to touch JavaScript, which is such a pleasure. Are there any questions? We have a mic. If anybody wants to sing a song or something, it's perfectly fine.
First of all, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. That was very entertaining. Is it the Rust compiler that's doing the compilation when you reload it like that? What's watching? I mean, do you have something watching your files? Like
Trunk. So there's something called Trunk, okay, which is a built system / server, and you just type trunk serve, and I have it here on that trunk. Yeah, so that takes care of all the glue work that needs to happen to have the WebAssembly loaded, all the JavaScript that needs to be written to have that loaded into the browser and everything. I wrote 0 JavaScript for this, 0, which for me is an awesome day.
Yeah, that's life goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Awesome. Anybody else? Anybody want to sing a song? Don't be shy. All right. Thank you so much for attending my talk. I really appreciate it.